guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, I'm Julie. I do everything from book reviews to tarot, and if you're returning, I'm so glad I haven't scared you off. And today I wanted to talk about Tender is the Flesh by Argentine author Agustina Bazterrica. Now, I actually picked up this book because I saw it on someone's book haul that they posted on TikTok. And suffice it to say, I have a funny story about this up on my Patreon, but suffice it to say that I should have taken the title a bit more literally, and I thought it was going to be about something entirely different. But basically what we're going to be doing today is I'll go over the plot of the book, and then I'll give you some of my thoughts on it as well. I'm going to try not to go into too many spoilers, but I do kind of want to talk about the ending. I'll include a little warning when I'm about to go into spoiler territory, but that won't be till around the end of the video, so buckle in. This book does have a few potential triggers. I'll mention them here. There's various scenes of graphic violence, just some very unsettling imagery, and a word that I'm not sure YouTube will allow me to say, I'll put it here, that is one of the main themes of the book. And I'm not going to go too into detail about the examples of these things, but I am going to mention at least one passage, so if any of this makes you uncomfortable, feel free to skip around as needed. We are set in a dystopian version of our own society, where in a timeline that's a little bit murky, probably within the past 20 years, a virus was discovered that makes animal meat poisonous to humans. All animal meat is poisonous to humans, and even interaction with animals can be potentially deadly to humans themselves. And so humans' desire for meat has made it so that in more recent years, the consumption of human flesh has been legalized by the government under various specific conditions. I've recorded this section of the video so many times because I'm having a little bit of trouble explaining this. This is where I wish the book went into a little bit more detail, because they don't really talk about the beginnings of this time period where human flesh consumption was legalized. It's a time period known as the transition, but how I understand it is that a certain section of the population, mainly the impoverished, were moved into captivity and used and raised in a way that was specifically meant for human consumption. And again, they do not call these individuals what they are. They call them specimen or head to kind of remove them further from the people that are consuming them. And they call their meat special meat, and you are forbidden from interacting with these individuals, with these specimen in any way other than how you might interact with cattle. We follow a man named Marcus Tejo, and he works at a processing plant where these specimens are often butchered or sold to distributors. It feels very weird to be talking about this so nonchalantly, but that is essentially the cold reality of this book. And he works at a very prominent plant, and he's the right hand of the boss. He had a major role to play in the transition era in creating rules and regulations for how the specimens are able to be kept domestically, and he's played a major role in this particular society, if I could speak today. At the start of the book, we know that Marcos lives alone. His wife recently moved out owing to the fact that their infant son passed away in months prior to the beginning of the novel, and she's recovering from the trauma at her mother's house. And other than being saddened by this horrific tragedy, Marcos tends to view his life and his work pretty dispassionately, and you get the sense that that's why he's made it so far in this society. It's pretty heavily illustrated to us that those who have a stroke of conscience and those who, begin to realize this system for what it is tend to break and go mad. And we learned that that's probably what happened with Marcos's own father, who was a butcher prior to the transition and worked solely with animal meat, but then when he discovered he had to work with human meat, had a bit of a breakdown. So Marcos sees this example in his own father and is pretty determined not to end up like him as well. One day, Marcos is gifted a live female specimen from a disgraced breeding center that they used to work with. She's considered first generation pure, meaning born and bred in captivity and treated like an animal for the entirety of her life. And we know that she's at least 20 years old, which is why I said earlier that the transition has been going on for at least that long, if not longer. And we find that as Marcos interacts with this female and feels a closer bond to her, that he begins to analyze the society he's in more critically and begins to really question, the nature of his line of work and really this whole societal structure, and he begins to break himself. Pretty much all animals have been killed off in this world, which I found kind of interesting. And Marcos begins to really believe that this is a conspiracy by the government. This whole societal structure of cannibalism is a conspiracy by the government to control population and control poverty levels and things of that nature. And the whole conspiracy thing is a bunch of theorizing, and it doesn't really quite go anywhere, and I wish it had, because to me the whole idea that every animal and their interactions with humans is potentially fatal and affects humans in the same way universally is a little bit ridiculous, and I wish that whole element of the conspiracy was explored more. And the fact that they were able to successfully kill off most of the world's animals, I said it was interesting before, and what I mean by interesting is a bit silly. I just don't see how all that could take place effectively and successfully. I know there are some strays that exist in the world and some packs of stray animals, but pretty effectively all animals have ceased to exist, and that just seems like such a leap of logic to me. Even though this is a novel and it does take place in a fictional world, I can't really describe the problems I had with that. It just really kind of took me out of it for a minute there when I had to accept that piece of logic in itself. One of the most common criticisms I see for this book that I'm not sure I agree with is that it's pure shock value, that the instances of violence against humans or specimens and some animals that we read about are there to just purely make you wince and make you say, oh my god, and that be the end of it. But I'm not sure I agree with it, because I think there's a broader purpose. I think this author wants to illustrate the depths of depravity that people are capable of, which is kind of the point in a lot of dystopian novels, and kind of how we can be socialized to accept certain rules that maybe would originally go against our morals once it's normalized and sanctioned. I'm going to put a sample passage up on the screen of what I'm talking about, and I'm going to read it to you guys as well. It's not terribly graphic, I mean it is, but for this book it's rather tame. And I'm going to have it up on the screen for as long as I'm reading the passage, so if you do not want to hear about it, you can skip this section, skip a few seconds. It's going to be up on the screen for as long as I'm talking about it. The smell of barbecue is in the air. They go to the rest area where the farmhands are roasting a rack of meat on a cross. El Gringo explains to Egmont that they've been preparing it since 8 this morning, so it melts in your mouth. And the guys are actually about to eat a kid. It's the most tender kind of meat. There's only just a little because a kid doesn't weigh as much as a calf. We're celebrating because one of the farmhands became a father, he explains. Want a sandwich? And here, I think, is a prime example of the hypocrisy and kind of doublethink that has to go on in order for the society to function properly. And it speaks to the power of both governments and socialization among peers, that just for the difference of how someone is raised, they can be seen as an animal versus a human. And this book really does explore that in a very cold and kind of dispassionate way, but it is very clear and in your face. One of the things that I think is interesting about how the book is written in particular is that it follows a third-person narration, but it's a close third person, so it follows our character only, but the book always refers to him as he. The characters in the book refer to him as Marcos and call him by Marcos, but the narration refers to him as he or him or his. And I think that speaks to how easily he could lose his identity in this system. Oftentimes it's talked about how people might find a way to eat someone with a first and last name, as they say. And that could be as simple as someone who stays out past the mandated curfew. So it's so easy for him to lose his identity in this system that is really a person-eat-person world, both literally and figuratively. I want to stress that the version I'm reading is translated to English, and I do wonder, how much of the writing style, how much of the voice, how much of the meaning of certain words were lost in translation in order to come up with a word that might mean something similar but might not have the exact same meaning. I mean, this book does say in its praise section that it was beautifully translated. Someone said in the praise section. So, I could be grasping at straws and this could be a direct translation, but you always have to wonder what is lost in that process. The writing, in the English translation at least, is very plain and in your face. There's no flowery language to dance around what's being said. It's in your face. And in a way, that does kind of mirror Marcos's own kind of dispassionate, mechanical way about going about life. He sees things as they are, and until he meets the female specimen, doesn't do a whole lot of questioning of his existence. I mean, there are peaks of it. There are little moments of sadness where he does kind of go down that road, but, you know, he continues to do what he's doing. And then when he meets the female specimen, he, like, you know, thinks about quitting his job. He stops eating meat. He loses sleep and generally suffers, generally has a bit of mental suffering that goes on. And here we have kind of the syntax and the word choice and all that kind of mirroring the personality of this character in a very interesting way. But you do wonder if that's how it was intended to come off in the Spanish language version. I say all that to say, no, I don't think this book is shock value for shock value's sake. I do believe what we're reading is meant to be shocking, meant to make us uncomfortable, yes, but it's in service of a larger theme, so I think that that is the intention, and therefore it is excusable in this case. And it's because of these themes and how Marcos seems to be fighting against them that I would like to discuss the ending, and if you're not interested in that, I'll put a time code up here, and you can skip to that time code. I'll give you 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. You've been warned. And now the ending, yes. So as we said before, Marcos is getting closer to the female. He teaches her how to dress herself. He teaches her to draw and kind of preoccupy herself around the house while he's gone. She cannot leave the house because she has a brand on her forehead identifying her as a specimen and not a human. But he essentially teaches her to become more human, and in that process falls in love with her and names her Jasmine. And in that process of falling in love, she becomes pregnant with his child. And the ending of the book finds Marcos trying to deliver the baby, and there's complications, so he calls his wife, who is a nurse. And initially she's disgusted by the fact that he slept with a specimen, but she successfully delivers the baby. And he tells the wife, you know, this baby's ours now, and then goes and kills Jasmine. And the wife is like, why did you do that? She could have given us more children. Because something I forgot to mention is that in the book, the wife, previous to the death of their son, had fertility issues. So she's like, you know, Jasmine could have given us more children. And Marcos says she had the human look of a domesticated animal. And that is the last line of the book. And I thought to myself, what is actually going on? The ending was powerful, yes, but I believe it betrayed Marcos's character development. Here he was built as this character who was beginning to question the societal norms around him and beginning to really see things for the depravity of what they were. And he began talking about running away with Jasmine. Yes, he thought more about his unborn child than probably he did Jasmine, but he discussed, you know, numerous times running away with her and starting a new life and the fleeting possibility of that. And, you know, in the phone calls with his wife, he's getting more and more distant from her. You begin to think, oh, this is the path he's on. And then with the arrival of his wife, he flips back into this mode of, you know, what is expected of him in the society. And you begin to think like, oh, maybe it's because his wife arrived and he did what he had to do. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's what it is. And like, maybe he just thought he had to play that role because now his wife was here and he couldn't justify to himself having a relationship with the specimen. But it kind of feels like this flew in the face of the rest of the book. And I had kind of similar feelings to when we read My Year of Rest and Relaxation. I felt like that ending was a little bit incongruent with what were kind of the themes of the book and what was kind of being set up and built. And I feel that way here too. Part of me thought like, oh, maybe he recognized his fantasy as fleeting and he thought there wasn't hope in it, so he did what he thought he had to do. That would be in line with the bleakness kind of usually present in a lot of dystopian novels. But his wife didn't want him to kill Jasmine, so I don't understand like why he felt the need to necessarily. Maybe he thought he couldn't be with Jasmine in a meaningful way with his wife now present. But he even says to her like, oh, this will be our baby. Like he doesn't shy away from including her in you know, the future of things. So it does seem like his character does a turn out of nowhere that I'm not quite sure is earned. I mean, the ending also, I've read online, is a bit divisive. I hadn't read spoilers prior, but just the fact that it was merely divisive, and I have to agree, like, I don't quite understand it, and I want you guys to let me know in the comments if you've read it, what you take away from the ending, and how you believe it should be interpreted, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, other than to be kind of, you know, in line with the bleakness, but for what purpose? You know what I mean? It's hard to give this book a numerical score. I will say that I did not enjoy it, but not for the typical reasons one does not enjoy the book. I think it set out what it was supposed to do, but that's just not my cup of tea, and it feels unfair to judge a book on that metric, because I think it accomplished everything it wanted to accomplish. But I don't know if I could engage with it again. I don't know how easily I could recommend it to someone else, because it's just that bleak and that graphic. I don't know. I am gonna give this, let's say, a nope out of 10. I'm gonna give it a nope out of 10. Nope does not equal 0. It's important to know that, but a nope just means, you know, I wouldn't engage with it. However, I think this book is very high value in terms of, you know, the discussions it can start. It definitely deserves its place in the pantheon of dystopian novels. Are there ones I would recommend ahead of this one? Yes, certainly. Like 1984, Brave New World are the classics that come to mind. I think they do a little bit of a better job in terms of carrying through their theming to the end. And there were some things like narrative plot holes and things that I thought were wrapped up a little bit too cleanly or explained away a little bit too cleanly that I wish the book explored more. I feel like in a very weird recommendation hole, because while I personally would not engage with this book again, I think it is worthwhile for someone who can stomach the violence, stomach the imagery here. So yeah, that's kind of where I land on it. If you can stomach it, by all means, but there are other ones I would recommend before it if you're just looking for a dystopian novel. But let me know your guys' thoughts in the comments. I'm very interested to know what you guys thought of the book, if you've read it, if you haven't, if you plan to. And be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next video. I'm not quite sure what our next book will be, but I'm interested to get your recommendations too if you have any in the comments. And yeah, come along the ride with me. Thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you to my patrons for making this video possible. You'll see their names at the end, and have a good one, guys. Bye!